He called her worthless in front of the judge. She stayed silent. Then she pulled out one document that ended his career. Derek Harrington laughed out loud in Harris County Family Court the moment his wife walked in without a lawyer. Actually laughed. He leaned toward his $750 an hour attorney and whispered something that made them both smile, like they were sharing a private joke at a funeral. Across the aisle, Rachel Mitchell sat alone at the respondent's table, a worn navy blazer over her shoulders and a single manila folder beneath her folded hands. The power gap was obscene. Him. Custom Armani suit. Corner office in downtown Houston. Country club membership. Real estate law practice pulling 7 figures a year. Her. 4-year-old blazer with frayed cuffs. 1-bedroom apartment in Spring Branch. A $63 in her checking account. Everyone in that courtroom saw a woman about to be destroyed. Derek saw a woman he'd already destroyed. A woman he'd locked out of her own home while she was dropping the kids at school. A woman he'd forced to sleep in her car for 3 nights until her sister could take her in. A woman he'd told their children had abandoned them. But here's what Derek didn't see. He didn't see the 18 months Rachel had spent working as an administrative assistant at a small law firm, watching, learning, taking notes on every case that crossed her desk. He didn't see the nights she'd stayed up until 2 a.m. earning her paralegal certification in 11 months instead of 18. He didn't see the hundreds of hours she'd spent tracing his hidden bank accounts, his shell companies, his offshore wire transfers, documenting everything while he bragged to his golf buddies about how he'd left her with nothing. Derek looked at his wife and saw a victim, a woman with no money, no education, no power, a woman who couldn't even afford a lawyer. He had no idea he was looking at the most dangerous person in that courtroom. What Rachel pulled out of that folder didn't just shock the judge. It triggered a federal investigation, ended Derek's 20-year legal career, and made him understand, for the first time in his miserable life, exactly how badly he'd underestimated the woman he'd called worthless. The courtroom smelled like old carpet cleaner and stale coffee, morning light cutting through dusty blinds and falling in pale stripes across worn wooden benches. Rachel sat perfectly still, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, small silver studs in her ears, the only jewelry she still owned after 18 months of financial warfare. Beside Derek sat Harrison Cole, senior partner at Cole & Associates, a man whose hourly rate could fund a modest wedding. Harrison's gold Rolex caught the light as he shuffled through a stack of documents, each page tabbed with colored markers, everything organized with the precision of a surgical team preparing to operate. The bailiff stepped forward. All rise. The Honorable Judge Margaret Sullivan presiding. Everyone stood. Judge Sullivan entered through the side door, her black robe flowing as she took her seat behind the elevated bench. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair cut short and practical, eyes that had seen every lie a courtroom could produce. Her reputation in Houston legal circles was well established. Fair, thorough, and absolutely allergic to games. Please be seated. The room settled. Rachel smoothed her skirt and sat upright, her hands returning to their position on the folder. Derek checked his phone before sliding it into his pocket, still smirking like he was waiting for the punchline to a joke everyone else had already heard. Judge Sullivan adjusted her reading glasses and reviewed the file before her. Case number 2-024-FC-3847. Harrington versus Harrington. Petition for dissolution of marriage, custody of minor children, and division of marital assets. She looked up. Counselor Cole, I see you're representing Mr. Harrington. Harrison rose smoothly. Yes, Your Honor. Harrison Cole representing Derek Harrington and Mrs. Harrington. The judge turned to Rachel. I don't see counsel listed for you. Are you representing yourself today? Rachel stood, her voice steady. Yes, Your Honor. I'm proceeding pro se. Derek leaned toward Harrison and whispered loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. Watch this. She's going to cry within 10 minutes. Harrison stifled a smile. Judge Sullivan's eyes flicked toward them, but she said nothing. She returned her attention to the documents, scanning pages in silence. The courtroom waited. Somewhere in the back, a chair creaked. Mr. Cole. Judge Sullivan set down the file. Your client has filed a motion requesting full custody of the minor children, sole possession of the marital residence, and significant spousal support from Mrs. Harrington. Is that correct? Harrison stood again. Yes, Your Honor. My client has been the primary financial provider throughout the marriage. Mrs. Harrington abandoned the marital residence without notice, leaving her husband to maintain the household and care for the children. We believe Mr. Harrington is clearly the more stable parent and deserves primary custody, along with appropriate financial considerations. Rachel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her expression remained neutral. She'd heard this lie so many times she could recite it in her sleep. Abandoned. Like she'd had a choice. Like Derek hadn't literally changed the locks while she was taking Emma to a dentist appointment. Judge Sullivan turned to her. Mrs. Harrington, you filed a counter motion requesting joint custody and equitable distribution of assets. You're also claiming spousal support. Is that accurate? Yes. No, Your Honor. Derek made a sound, something between a snort and a laugh. Harrison placed a hand on his arm, but Derek shrugged it off like he was swatting a fly. Your Honor. Derek half stood without waiting for permission. May I address the court directly? Judge Sullivan regarded him coolly over her glasses. Mr. Harrington, you have counsel present. I prefer to hear from him. Derek waved a dismissive hand. With all due respect, Your Honor, I think everyone in this room can see exactly what's happening here. My wife couldn't even hire an attorney. She's sitting there with a folder and a pen, like this is some kind of parent-teacher conference. A murmur rippled through the sparse gallery. Rachel's fingers curled slightly around the edge of her folder, but her face remained absolutely calm. She'd waited 18 months for this moment. She could wait a few more minutes. Mr. Harrington, Judge Sullivan's tone dropped several degrees. Sit down. He didn't. Your Honor, I don't mean any disrespect to the court, but this is a waste of everyone's time. My wife has nothing. No income worth mentioning. No education beyond high school. No ability whatsoever to provide for our children. I've been paying for everything for years. The mortgage on a $1.2 million house, private school tuition for both kids, health insurance, vacations, everything. He paused for effect, spreading his hands like he was presenting obvious facts to a slow student. And now, she wants half? After she walked out? After she abandoned our family? He laughed, a short, ugly sound that echoed off the marble walls. She's worthless, Your Honor. She always has been. Without me, she'd be living in a shelter somewhere. The word hung in the air like poison gas. Worthless. Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't react at all. She simply sat there, hands folded on her folder, eyes forward, steady as bedrock. Inside, something cold and patient was waiting, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Judge Sullivan set down her pen with exaggerated care. She removed her glasses and placed them on the bench, then looked at Derek with an expression that could have flash frozen the Houston summer. Mr. Harrington. She spoke slowly, deliberately. Sit. Down. Now. Something in her voice must have finally reached him. Derek lowered himself into his chair, though the smirk didn't fully leave his face. He still thought he was winning. He still thought this was going exactly according to plan. The judge turned to Rachel. Mrs. Harrington, your husband has made some serious accusations about your character and circumstances. Do you have a response? Rachel rose slowly. She looked directly at the judge, not at Derek. Not once. Your Honor, I don't dispute that my husband earned the majority of our household income during our marriage. He's a successful real estate attorney, but his success was only possible because I made it possible. I managed our home. I raised our children. I put my own future on hold so he could build his career. Her voice was calm, measured, but every word carried the weight of 18 months of fury compressed into perfect control. When we met, I was 2 semesters away from finishing my bachelor's degree in business administration. I dropped out because Derek convinced me that we should start our family right away, that he would take care of everything, that I didn't need a degree to be a good wife and mother. She paused to let that land. After our separation, she continued. Mr. Harrington froze all of our joint accounts within 48 hours. He changed the locks on our home while I was taking our daughter to a dental appointment. When I came back, my clothes were in garbage bags on the front lawn. I had $63 in my purse and nowhere to go. Derek shifted in his seat but said nothing. For 3 nights, I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot because I had no money and no one available to take me in. Rachel's voice didn't waver. My husband told our children, a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, that I had abandoned them. that I didn't love them anymore, that everything was my fault. She took a breath. For the past 18 months, I've been living in a one-bedroom apartment in Spring Branch, working 2 jobs to make rent, and trying to rebuild my life from nothing while my husband told everyone who would listen that I was crazy, unstable, and worthless. She finally looked at Derek. Just for a moment. Just long enough for him to see something in her eyes he'd never seen before. I don't have a legal team, Your Honor, but I have the truth. And I have this. She held up the manila folder. Derek laughed. Actually laughed out loud in open court, like someone had just told him his greatest joke had finally landed. Judge Sullivan's head turned toward him with the slow precision of a hawk-spotting movement. Did you find something amusing, Mr. Harrington? Derek crossed his arms, still grinning. Your Honor, forgive me, but my wife just delivered quite the performance. She wants you to believe she's some kind of victim, but the reality is she left because she couldn't handle the lifestyle we'd built. She wanted to find herself, or whatever self-help podcast nonsense she'd been listening to. I didn't freeze anything. I protected our family's assets from someone who clearly wasn't thinking straight. He gestured toward Rachel's folder dismissively. And now she shows up with some folder full of whatever she printed off the internet, expecting this court to hand her half of everything I've spent 20 years building? He shook his head. She can't even afford a lawyer, Your Honor. How is she supposed to afford our children? Silence. Cold, crushing silence. Judge Sullivan folded her hands. Mr. Cole. Her voice was ice and steel. Control your client immediately, or I will hold him in contempt and have him removed from this courtroom. Am I being clear? Harrison stood quickly, sweat visible on his forehead. My apologies, Your Honor. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't. She turned back to Rachel. Mrs. Harrington, you mentioned you have something to present to the court. What's in that folder? Rachel paused. For the first time, something flickered across her expression. Not fear, not nervousness, something else entirely. The look of a woman who had walked through fire to reach this exact moment and was finally about to show everyone exactly what she'd been carrying through the flames. Your Honor, she said quietly, I'd like to submit this as Exhibit A. She opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. What Rachel held in her hand didn't just change the hearing. It didn't just expose Derek Harrington's lies. It triggered a chain of events that would cost him his law license, his reputation, his fortune, and very nearly his freedom. But before I show you exactly what was on that paper, I need you to do something important. If you believe in real stories about justice, resilience, and people who refuse to stay broken when the world tries to destroy them, hit that subscribe button right now. Take 2 seconds and click it. Then smash that like button because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear these stories. And here's what I really want to know. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Are you in Houston, Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Miami, New York? I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get back to Rachel, because what she did next didn't just shock the courtroom. It ended a man's entire career in less than 5 minutes. Rachel handed the single sheet of paper to the bailiff, who carried it to Judge Sullivan with the careful neutrality of someone who had no idea they were delivering a bomb. The judge accepted the document. She glanced at it casually at first, the way you'd look at a grocery receipt. Then she stopped. Her eyes narrowed. She read the same paragraph again. Then again. The courtroom waited. The silence stretched so thin you could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. Derek leaned toward Harrison, his voice a harsh whisper. What the hell is she looking at? What did Rachel give her? Harrison shook his head almost imperceptibly. I don't know. Judge Sullivan set the document down slowly, like it was made of something volatile. When she looked up, something had changed in her expression. The professional neutrality had cracked, and underneath it was something cold and sharp and absolutely merciless. Mrs. Harrington. Her voice was different now, quieter, more dangerous. Where did you obtain this document? Rachel's voice remained steady. From the Harris County Recorder's Office, Your Honor. It's a certified copy of a quitclaim deed filed 14 months ago. Derek's face twitched. Recorder's Office? What quitclaim deed? He looked at Harrison with rising panic. What is she talking about? Harrison grabbed his arm, trying to silence him, but Derek was already spiraling. Judge Sullivan ignored him completely. She picked up the document again, reading aloud now so the entire courtroom could hear. This document shows that on March 15th of last year, Mr. Derek Harrington transferred full ownership of a commercial property located at 4521 Seawall Boulevard in Galveston, Texas, to an entity called Harrington Holdings, LLC. She looked up. Mr. Cole, is your client aware that this property does not appear anywhere in his financial disclosures to this court? Harrison rose slowly, his composure visibly cracking. Your Honor, I'm not familiar with this document. If we could have a brief recess to review the... Denied. The word hit like a slap. Judge Sullivan continued, her voice dropping to something close to a growl. You've had months to prepare for this hearing, counselor. Months. If your client failed to disclose a property transfer, that's his failure, not the court's problem. She turned to Derek, who had gone pale under his expensive tan. Mr. Harrington, do you own commercial property in Galveston? Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on a dock. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. That property it's not really part of the marriage. It's a business investment, separate from a business investment. Judge Sullivan repeated the words with the kind of contempt usually reserved for people who kick puppies. Made during the marriage. Purchased with marital funds. Transferred to a shell company that you created and control. And you somehow forgot to mention it. Derek was sweating now, visible beads forming at his hairline, rolling down toward his collar. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. My wife found one piece of paper and suddenly, I'm not finished. He shut up. Mrs. Harrington? The judge turned back to Rachel. Do you have additional documentation regarding your husband's financial activities? Rachel opened her folder. Yes, Your Honor. Quite a bit more. She pulled out a stack of papers nearly 2 inches thick and handed them to the bailiff. Bank statements, wire transfer records, corporate filings, LLC formation documents, account records from 3 different financial institutions in 2 different countries. Judge Sullivan accepted the stack and began reviewing it, page by page, her expression growing darker with every sheet she turned. Harrison leaned toward Derek, his whisper carrying an edge of barely controlled fury. What did you do? What the hell did you do? Derek didn't answer. His hands were trembling. His $750 an hour lawyer was looking at him like he was radioactive. Mr. Harrington. Judge Sullivan's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. According to these records, you have transferred approximately $340,000 in marital assets to various accounts and entities that were not disclosed to this court. Is this accurate? Derek's voice came out strangled. Those transfers were for legitimate business purposes. My wife doesn't understand how... Your wife, the judge interrupted, leaning forward with sudden intensity. Your wife appears to understand a great deal more than you assumed. She turned to Rachel with something that might have been respect, might have been admiration, might have been the look one professional gives another when they recognize quality work. Mrs. Harrington, how did you obtain these financial records? Rachel stood a little straighter. The scared woman Derek had tried to create was nowhere in evidence. In her place stood someone else entirely. Over the past 18 months, Your Honor, while working full-time as an administrative assistant at a law firm, I also completed the requirements for a paralegal certification through Houston Community College. I learned how to conduct legal research, trace financial transactions, and document evidence. I spent every evening and every weekend for over a year tracking down what my husband had hidden. She paused. And I found more than just hidden assets. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Ripples of unease spread through the courtroom. Harrison was furiously scribbling notes. Derek looked like a man watching a noose being measured for his neck. More? Judge Sullivan's voice was dangerously quiet. Rachel pulled out one final document from the very back of her folder. A single page. She held it like it contained a nuclear launch code. Your Honor, this is a sworn affidavit that my husband submitted to this court 7 weeks ago. In it, he stated under oath that he had fully disclosed all marital assets and that he had not transferred any property or funds outside the marriage without my knowledge or consent. She let the silence build for a perfect beat. That statement was false. The Galveston property transfer, the wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, the creation of Harrington Holdings LLC, All of it happened while he was under a legal obligation to disclose. While he was swearing under oath that he had nothing to hide. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried to every corner of the room. My husband didn't just hide assets, Your Honor. He committed perjury. The word exploded through the courtroom like a grenade. Perjury. Derek shot to his feet. That's a lie. She's making this up. She's not even a real lawyer, she's just a... Mr. Harrington. Judge Sullivan's voice cracked like a rifle shot. You will sit down immediately, or I will have you removed in handcuffs. He dropped into his chair like his strings had been cut. Harrison had gone completely still beside him. The color had drained from his face. He was a senior partner at one of Houston's most respected law firms, and he was watching his client self-destruct in real time, live, in front of a judge who looked ready to reach for a gavel and never stop swinging. Judge Sullivan removed her glasses. She set them on the bench with ceremonial precision, then folded her hands and looked at Derek with an expression that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Mr. Harrington. Her voice was almost gentle now, almost soft, which somehow made it infinitely worse. Do you understand the position you've put yourself in? He couldn't meet her eyes. Perjury in family court proceedings is a third-degree felony in the state of Texas. That's 2 to 10 years in state prison. But you already knew that, didn't you? Because you're an attorney, licensed to practice law in this state, an officer of the court. She let each phrase land separately, like body blows. If these allegations are substantiated, and Mrs. Harrington's documentation appears quite thorough, you won't just face criminal charges. You'll face the State Bar of Texas. Disciplinary proceedings, potential suspension, potential disbarment. Everything you've built over 20 years, everything you thought made you untouchable, could disappear. Derek looked at Rachel then, really looked at her. For the first time since she'd walked into the courtroom, maybe for the first time in years, he actually saw her. And what he saw terrified him. Not the scared woman he'd locked out of their home. Not the crying mess he'd forced to sleep in a Walmart parking lot. Not the helpless victim he'd convinced himself he could destroy without consequence. He saw someone else entirely. Someone patient. Someone methodical. Someone who had spent 18 months building a case against him while he laughed about her poverty at country club dinners. She'd been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time, and he'd never even known she was playing. Rachel met his gaze without flinching. No triumph in her expression. No gloating. Just calm, steady certainty. I told you I had the truth, she said quietly. And now so does everyone else. The recess lasted 2 hours. Rachel spent it on a bench in the marble hallway outside the courtroom, her folder closed on her lap, watching attorneys and clerks hurry past on their way to other battles. The Harris County Courthouse was a massive building, all polished stone and high ceilings, designed to make people feel small, to remind them that they were facing something bigger than themselves. For 18 months, this building had represented everything Rachel feared. The power of lawyers, the weight of money, the crushing machinery of a system designed to favor people like Derek. Today, for the first time, it felt different. Today, it felt like justice might actually live here. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister Morgan. How's it going? Rachel typed back. I did it. I actually did it. 3 dots appeared. Then, did what? Rachel, what happened? Rachel smiled slightly. I'll tell you everything tonight. It's not over yet. She slid the phone back into her purse and closed her eyes, letting herself remember how she'd gotten here. Not just to this bench, but to this moment. This impossible, beautiful, terrifying moment. 18 months ago, she'd been standing in the kitchen of their River Oaks house, the showcase property Derek had bought to impress his partners, when he'd told her he wanted a divorce. He'd said it casually, almost cheerfully, like he was ordering lunch. Then he'd slid a folder across the granite countertop and told her to sign. She'd opened it, read the terms. Full custody to him, the house to him, their savings, their investments, their retirement accounts, all to him. For her, a small monthly allowance that wouldn't cover rent in any decent neighborhood, and only for 12 months. After that, nothing. She'd asked him if this was a joke. He'd laughed, that same ugly laugh she'd heard in the courtroom today. Then he'd said, sign it, Rachel. We both know you're going to end up signing it eventually. You have nothing without me. You are nothing without me. Let's just skip the part where you embarrass yourself pretending otherwise. She'd refuse to sign. 3 days later, she'd come home from taking Emma to the dentist to find her key didn't work. Her clothes were in garbage bags on the lawn. Derek's car was in the driveway. But when she'd pounded on the door, no one answered. She'd had $63 in her purse, her phone, the clothes on her back. Nothing else. That night, she'd parked in the far corner of a Walmart parking lot in Spring Branch and cried until she couldn't breathe. She'd called Morgan, but Morgan was traveling for work, wouldn't be back for 5 days. She'd called 2 friends from the country club, women she'd lunched with for years. Both calls went to voicemail and were never returned. She'd slept in her car for 3 nights, using a gym membership to shower, eating from the dollar menu at fast food restaurants, watching her $63 shrink to $40, then $20, then almost nothing. On the 4th day, Morgan had finally come home and Rachel had moved onto her couch. But even then, even in those first terrible weeks, something had shifted inside her. Something had hardened. Derek thought she was worthless. Derek thought she would crumble. Derek thought she would crawl back to him eventually, broken and desperate, ready to sign whatever he put in front of her. He was wrong. She'd gotten the job at the law firm 3 weeks later. Administrative assistant, answering phones, filing documents, managing calendars. $18 an hour, barely enough to cover a tiny apartment in Spring Branch and the bare essentials of survival. But the job came with something Derek hadn't anticipated. Access. Access to legal documents. Access to research databases. Access to attorneys who were willing to answer questions from a curious assistant who seemed so eager to learn. Rachel had watched, listened, studied. She'd stayed late after everyone else went home, reading case files, learning how forensic accountants traced hidden money, understanding how shell companies worked and how people used them to hide assets from divorcing spouses. 6 months in, she'd enrolled in night classes at Houston Community College. Paralegal certification. The program normally took 18 months. Rachel had completed it in 11, studying on her lunch breaks, in waiting rooms, in her car in the parking lot of Emma and Tyler's school during her court-mandated visitation weekends. The children. God, the children. That was the part that still made her chest ache. Emma was 12 now, Tyler was 8, and Derek had spent 18 months poisoning them against her, telling them she'd abandoned them, telling them she was unstable, unreliable, selfish, telling them she loved her freedom more than she loved them. Every other weekend, Rachel got 2 days, 48 hours to undo 2 weeks of manipulation. She'd hold them close and tell them the truth as gently as she could. But she could see the doubt in Emma's eyes, the way Tyler sometimes pulled away when she tried to hug him. Derek had taken almost everything from her, the house, the money, the life she'd built. But the children, the way he'd weaponized them, used them as instruments of punishment. That was the cruelty she could never forgive. That was what had kept her going through the endless nights of research. The weekends spent in the Harris County Recorder's office, pulling property records. The hours tracing wire transfers through bank statements she'd obtained through her attorney connections at work. That was what had led her to the Galveston property, the shell company, the offshore accounts, the entire architecture of deception Derek had built to hide his money from her. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Harrington? Yes, this is Linda Patterson. I'm a forensic accountant. I understand you're in proceedings against your husband. Rachel sat up straighter. How did you get this number? Your sister contacted me. She said you might need professional help documenting financial irregularities. I've been doing this for 22 years, specializing in hidden asset recovery and divorce cases. Rachel felt her heart rate increase. I've already found quite a bit on my own. I know. I saw the court filing from this morning. Word travels fast in Houston legal circles. A pause. You did exceptional work for someone without formal training, but I think there's more. Significantly more. What do you mean? I mean, Derek Harrington is a real estate attorney with deep connections throughout Texas. The $340,000 you found is likely just the surface. When men like him start hiding money, they don't stop with one trick. They create layers, redundancies, backup plans. Rachel was quiet for a moment, processing. I can't afford to hire you. I'm barely making rent. I know that too, which is why I'm calling to offer my services pro bono. Rachel blinked. Why? Because 23 years ago, I was exactly where you are right now. Sitting in a courthouse hallway. No money, no lawyer, no power. Facing a husband who thought he could bury me. Someone helped me then. A woman I'd never met who decided I was worth fighting for. She taught me how to trace money, how to build a case, how to fight back. Linda's voice softened. She's gone now, but I promised her I'd pay it forward. Every year I take on one case pro bono. One woman who reminds me of who I used to be. This year, Mrs. Harrington, that woman is you. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. What would you need from me? Everything you've already gathered, and permission to go deeper. I want to examine his firm's finances, his partnership agreements, his client trust accounts. If he's been hiding money from you, there's a possibility he's been hiding it from others too. Business partners, clients, possibly even the IRS. Rachel's breath caught. That would be federal. Yes, it would. Linda's voice carried a warning. If we go down this path, it gets ugly. Your husband will fight back with everything he has. He'll try to discredit you. Or attack your fitness as a mother, maybe even threaten you directly. But if we find what I think we're going to find, he won't just lose this case. He'll lose his license, his practice, and possibly his freedom. The words hung in the air. Rachel thought about Emma's confused eyes. Tyler's reluctant hugs. The 18 months of lies Derek had fed them about their mother. She thought about the Walmart parking lot, the garbage bags on the lawn, the $63 that was supposed to be her entire future. She thought about Derek laughing in that courtroom, calling her worthless, telling the judge she couldn't even afford a lawyer. Do it, Rachel said. Find everything there is to find. And don't stop until you've found it all. 6 weeks later, Rachel walked back into Harris County Family Court for the final hearing. The same courtroom, the same dusty blinds and worn wooden benches, the same stale coffee smell, but everything else had transformed. This time, the gallery was packed. Reporters occupied an entire row, notebooks open, phones recording. Word had spread through Houston's legal community like wildfire. A prominent real estate attorney facing accusations of perjury, hidden assets, and potential tax fraud, brought down by the wife he'd called worthless, the woman who'd represented herself with nothing but a folder and a community college certificate. It was the kind of story that made careers for journalists and nightmares for attorneys. Derek Harrington looked like a man who'd aged a decade in 6 weeks. His Armani suit still fit perfectly, but his face had hollowed. Dark circles ringed his eyes like bruises. His hands trembled slightly against the defense table. The smirk that had defined him at the first hearing was gone, replaced by something desperate and cornered. Harrison Cole sat beside him, but the body language between them had shifted dramatically. Distance now. Professional obligation rather than confident partnership. Harrison knew exactly what was about to happen. He'd seen the evidence. He'd read the forensic accountant's report. He knew there was no winning this, only managing the catastrophe. All rise. The Honorable Judge Margaret Sullivan presiding. Everyone stood. Judge Sullivan entered and took her position behind the bench. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her posture that suggested anticipation. The look of someone about to deliver a verdict she'd been composing for weeks. Please be seated. The room settled. We're here for the final hearing in Harrington versus Harrington. Judge Sullivan arranged her papers with deliberate precision. Over the past 6 weeks, this court has received substantial additional documentation regarding the financial circumstances of this case. I've reviewed every submission from both parties, consulted with court-appointed forensic experts, and considered all evidence presented. She looked up. Mr. Harrington, I want to be absolutely clear about what I'm about to say. Derek stared at the table in front of him, unable to meet her eyes. You came into this courtroom 6 weeks ago and called your wife worthless. You mocked her for representing herself. You laughed at her for not being able to afford an attorney. You claimed she was destitute, incompetent, and incapable of caring for your children. Judge Sullivan paused, letting each word land. You were spectacularly, catastrophically, and unforgivably wrong. Derek flinched like he'd been struck. The forensic investigation conducted over the past 6 weeks has revealed a pattern of systematic deception that goes far beyond what Mrs. Harrington initially discovered. You did not hide $340,000 in marital assets, Mr. Harrington. You hid $1.4 million. $1.4 million concealed through shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified business records, and fraudulent property transfers. A gasp rippled through the gallery. The reporters were scribbling furiously. Moreover, Judge Sullivan's voice hardened. The investigation uncovered evidence suggesting that you have been systematically underreporting income to the Internal Revenue Service for at least the past 4 years. This court has forwarded all relevant documentation to federal authorities. Derek's lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent. Derek shook his head violently, his face gray. You committed perjury, Mr. Harrington. You filed sworn statements with this court that you knew to be false. You attempted to defraud your wife of assets that legally belonged to her. And you did all of this while standing in my courtroom, laughing at her, calling her worthless, acting as though you were untouchable. The judge removed her glasses and set them on the bench. You are not untouchable. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. This court finds as follows. Judge Sullivan picked up a document and began reading with the formal precision of a judgment being carved in stone. First, regarding custody of the minor children. Joint legal custody is awarded to both parents. Primary physical custody is awarded to Mrs. Harrington with a 70-30 split. The children will reside primarily with their mother in the marital residence and spend alternate weekends with their father, subject to supervised visitation protocols, until a family counselor certifies that Mr. Harrington has completed court-ordered therapy regarding parental alienation. Derek's jaw clenched, but he remained silent. He had no choice. Second, regarding division of assets. Given Mr. Harrington's deliberate and systematic concealment of marital property, this court awards Mrs. Harrington 75% of all community assets. This includes the marital residence, all investment accounts, all retirement funds, and the full value of all hidden assets identified in the forensic investigation. Rachel sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, absorbing each word. Third, regarding spousal support. Mr. Harrington will pay Mrs. Harrington $7,500 per month for a period of 8 years, plus child support as calculated by state guidelines. These payments will be automatically garnished from any income or assets and are non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. Harrison was no longer even pretending to take notes. He was staring at the table, defeated. Fourth, Judge Sullivan set down the document and looked directly at Derek with an expression of barely contained contempt. This court is referring these proceedings to the State Bar of Texas for immediate investigation of professional misconduct. The evidence establishes clearly that you violated your oath as an attorney, lied under oath to this court, and betrayed every ethical standard your profession demands. She paused. I'm also formally requesting that the Harris County District Attorney's Office review these proceedings for potential criminal prosecution. Perjury is a felony, Mr. Harrington. You may have forgotten that somewhere between your country club dinners and your offshore wire transfers, but this court has not. Derek looked like a man watching his own execution. Judge Sullivan leaned forward. Let me tell you what your wife did, Mr. Harrington. While you were mocking her, hiding money, and poisoning your children against her, she worked 2 jobs. She earned a paralegal certification in 11 months, studying every night after 12-hour shifts. She learned how to trace financial records, analyze corporate structures, and build a legal case from scratch. She did this while living in a 1-bedroom apartment she could barely afford, while sleeping on a pull-out couch so her children could have the bedroom on weekends, while eating rice and beans for dinner because that's what she could afford after paying rent. She did more in 18 months with a community college education and $63 than you've done with your law degree and your 7-figure practice. The judge's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the silent courtroom. You called her worthless, Mr. Harrington. But she's worth more than you'll ever understand, and you're about to spend the rest of your life discovering exactly what you threw away. She picked up her gavel. This court rules in favor of the petitioner. The marriage of Derek and Rachel Harrington is dissolved. All orders are effective immediately. The gavel fell. The sound echoed like a thunderclap, like a door slamming on one life and opening onto another. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed toward the exits, phones already pressed to ears. Derek sat frozen, staring at nothing, as Harrison gathered papers and murmured about appeals and damage control that both of them knew were meaningless. Rachel rose from her chair slowly. She gathered her folder, the same folder she'd carried into that first hearing 6 weeks ago, and walked toward the aisle. As she passed Derek's table, he looked up at her. His face was a ruin of shock and fury, and something that might have been the first glimmer of genuine understanding. "This isn't over," he said hoarsely. "You think you've won, but I'll appeal. I'll fight this. Rachel stopped. She turned to face him fully. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. This man she'd married. This man she'd sacrificed her education for. This man who'd locked her out of her home and made her sleep in a parking lot and told their children she didn't love them. Then she spoke, quietly enough that only he could hear. "You're right, Derek. It's not over. For me, this is the beginning. A new life. A fresh start. My children back in my arms." She leaned slightly closer. "But for you? This is just the start of consequences. The bar investigation, the IRS audit, the criminal referral, explaining to Emma and Tyler why their father is in the newspaper for fraud. Watching everything you built disappear piece by piece." She straightened. "I was never worthless. You just needed me to believe I was, because that was the only way you could control me. But you don't control me anymore. You don't control anything anymore." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The courtroom doors swung open. The Houston afternoon sun streamed through the massive windows of the courthouse lobby, warm and bright and impossibly beautiful. Rachel stepped into the light. Her phone rang. "Emma." "Mom?" "Hi, sweetheart. Dad just texted. He said," a shaky breath, "he said he lost. He said you cheated." Rachel closed her eyes. "I didn't cheat, baby. I told the truth. Your father hid money that belonged to both of us, and the judge found out." Silence. Then quietly, "So we're coming home? To the real house? With you?" Yes, baby. You're coming home. Both of you. Tonight." Emma started crying. Not sad crying. Something else. Relief, maybe. The sound of a child finally allowed to stop pretending. "I missed you, Mom. I'm sorry I believed what he said. I'm sorry You don't have to apologize for anything." Rachel's own voice cracked. "You were put in an impossible situation by an adult who should have protected you. None of this was your fault. None of it. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. More than anything in this world. I'll see you tonight." She ended the call and stood in the courthouse lobby, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, tears of release, of exhaustion, awe of 18 months of fighting finally reaching their end. Her phone buzzed. A text from Linda Patterson. "You did it. Congratulations." Rachel typed back. "We did it. Thank you. For everything." She wiped her eyes, straightened the blazer that had carried her through 2 hearings and 1,000 sleepless nights, and walked toward the exit. Behind her, somewhere in that courthouse, Derek Harrington was beginning to comprehend the full magnitude of his destruction. The bar investigation would take months. The IRS audit would take longer. The criminal case, if it materialized, could take years. But Rachel wasn't thinking about Derek anymore. She was thinking about Emma's voice cracking with relief. About Tyler's confused face finally clearing when he understood the truth. Or about the house in River Oaks that would feel like home again because her children would be in it. She was thinking about the woman she'd been 18 months ago. Scared, broke, sleeping in a Walmart parking lot with $63 to her name. And the woman she'd become. Someone who refused to break. Someone who fought back. Someone who won. She pushed through the courthouse doors and stepped into the bright Texas afternoon. The Houston skyline glittered in the distance. Traffic hummed past on the street. People hurried by on their own journeys, carrying their own battles, fighting their own fights. Rachel Mitchell stood in the sunlight and breathed deeply. And for the first time in years, she felt completely, utterly, magnificently free. So, viewers, what do you think about Rachel's journey? Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? Have you ever had to rebuild your entire life from nothing? Have you ever been told you were worthless by someone who was terrified of what you might become if you ever realized your true value? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about your own strength, if it reminded you of someone who needs to hear this right now, share it. Send it to them. Let them know they're not alone. Because here's what I want you to remember, what I want you to carry with you long after this video ends. You are never as powerless as someone wants you to believe. The people who work hardest to keep you small are the ones most terrified of what you'll become when you finally stand up. And the truth always finds a way. Until next time.